I'm just going to start the recording on my phone too, just in case anything happens.
Okay. I mean, it's going, so
Alright,
picking this up.
cool. Let me just get this going here. Alright. Alright, so in terms of themes in this story, potential sources of inspiration for this story, certain things that kind of embody these tropes. We have the first thing that I was able to find was the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. So Orpheus and Eurydice, they were going to be married, and then Eurydice got bit by a snake and died. Orpheus then played his lyre and sang his way through the underworld to the point where the demons themselves were weeping. So Orpheus was the greatest musician, singer among the gods, and that's why he was able to navigate through Hades this way. And then when he got to Hades and Persephone, he begged them to free the soul of Eurydice, and they agreed to do it on one condition, which was as he walks out of Hades, he cannot look back to make sure that she's there. And of course, like a typical Greek tragedy, at the last minute he looks back to make sure she's there, and then she falls into the abyss, and then they both die. That's how that story ends. The other potential source of information would be the myth of Balder, the Norse god, the son of Odin, who was also known as the Norse god of light. And he was known to be very beautiful, and he also was liked by all the gods. And he spread happiness wherever he went. But then he started having nightmares, and then an oracle prophesied that his fate would be rather bleak. And so his mother got all of the other gods to agree not to hurt him, and then a spell was put on where nothing could hurt him except for mistletoe, which of course Loki overheard this, and being the god of mischief, he concocted a scheme to have Balder shot with a mistletoe, and then Balder ended up in the underworld, in Hell, Hel, and they sent Hamon the Bold down to Hell to liberate his spirit. And Hel, the goddess of the dead, said that if every single being in the world would weep for Balder, then she would release his soul. So what ended up happening was everyone did weep except for this one massive giantess that a lot of people think was Loki in disguise, refused to weep, and then his soul remained in Hell. So no one in these two myths really succeeded in liberating their loved one from the underworld. But in this story, Luthien actually does. And some parallels would be like Luthien and Orpheus are both fantastic singers. They both sing to the god of the dead. But Luthien ends up getting her way, but Orpheus doesn't. So in terms of liberating captives from the dead, I'm only aware of this story being one where the protagonist actually succeeds. So if either of you are aware of one where the task of liberating someone from the underworld is successful, by all means let me know. So in terms of the themes in this story, though, certain potential discussion points. Destiny is very present in this theme, or in this story, and that's consistent throughout his entire legendarium. I mean, ultimately it's a battle of Luvatar and Melkor, so Luvatar is using divine providence, and Melkor is using a discorded privation of Luvatar's will to counteract him. Additionally, saintly love is also another theme in this story. It's present in pretty much almost all of Tolkien's stories, save a couple, where we have Luthien playing the role of the loving intercessor to intercede for the soul of one she loves. And then loyalty. I think loyalty typically gets overlooked in this story because Huon is extremely loyal. He's a hound of heaven. He can only speak 3 times before he dies, and he uses all 3 opportunities to help Beren Luthien. Additionally, Finrod Felagund also is an example of loyalty because he made an oath to a relative of Barad-dûr, or Barad-dûr. Gotcha. And then from there, he agrees to keep his oath even though he's rotting in a dungeon and could definitely escape. But instead he chooses to stay there and basically die with his friends. So the last thing that I just wanted to touch on in this super brief PowerPoint is the bodies of Beren and Luthien were said to never have been found. And one thing that I just find super interesting is if you look at the screen, it's a picture of J.R.R. Tolkien's grave, and on his grave is inscribed Beren, and underneath his wife's name on the tombstone is etched Luthien. And he wanted that to happen in 1971 when she died, and then when he passed in 1973, his children figured that he might want the same thing. He would want the same treatment. So, given the resemblance there, I think it's just interesting that history happened to have panned out that way. So, that's basically the PowerPoint. So in terms of discussion, I remember, Amanda, you said something about how Luthien embodies the ideal female archetype. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, right. Well, we just said she... Oh man, it's going to help with carrying my voice backwards. She encompasses every single sort of, I guess you could say, feminine type that I come across in stories. Right? Because you mentioned last time that as a character, she's somewhat thin. You know, it's really in the way that we would think of character in the modern day, you know, where you have to have hopes and dreams and individual quirks and whatever. But obviously, we're not dealing with individual hopes and dreams and quirks. We're dealing with archetypes. So in this case, when we embody everything, let's say, about the ideal feminine, it's the obvious, where, you know, she's very beautiful. She has all of the skills that are generally ascribed to female characters, like in every story, you know, and around all cultures, you know, the singing is ideal in basically every culture I've ever seen. Her feminine wiles actually are also fairly normal. There are actually quite a lot of people give female characters in traditional stories a bad rap, like, well, they just get to be princesses, they get to be rescued. That's not true in most folklore. Even the Arabs and friggin' Islam have some fairly active female protagonists, as much as they also hate women. There are numerous, like even in the Arabs, they have stories of women, you know, marching miles and miles and miles and miles, you know, to find their love and rescue him from some, you know, fate, whether she accidentally, you know, set this fate on her, which is overlooked, I guess. I guess Luthien, to get back to it, obviously she's beautiful. She does the song, the beautiful singing, which lulls people to sleep. I think probably in traditional cultures, they probably almost sort of view the feminine as some sort of curtailing of the martial spirit, is the way you see it frequently, especially in cultures that were highly militaristic. So
Like
the symbolism, I would say, for bringing the spring also comes down to the whole another feminine ideal of you know, like fertility and youth and the bringing forth of new life, which is why you see that in a lot of cultures. You have some sort of goddess of spring or goddess, you know, plant life, or, you know, something like that, or that helps to bring life, or you see actually quite commonly women as healers, and that's again probably just because in reality women do tend to make the best nurturers. Just how it is. Men might make better doctors, make better nurses. To me, and again, that's across cultures. Even I actually would say that the weeping in order to make someone better seems to be commonality across cultures. Probably something about the feminine. Perhaps it's the expression of feminine compassion that all these other, you know, cultures are keying in on. Supposedly, I know women's tears like reduces testosterone levels in men. It's very possible. So that could be something else they're looking at, so that women's tears, in some sense, help to calm, let's say, again, the martial aspect of masculinity. And perhaps, you know, various cultures kind of picked up on that. So her using that as a healing thing or as a calming thing. Very straightforward, I would say. I'm trying to think, because I don't think she didn't have a weaving ability, right?
No.
I don't think she did.
No.
A few things that, let's say she's looking, although the weaving actually can also be viewed in a negative sense, because that can be viewed as sort of laying designs or traps. That might be why Tolkien avoided that one in particular. But I mean, to get back to like other female characters who are quite active, there's a lot of Celtic stories where the guy will be in some sort of dire straits, and then his wife or somebody will have to come up with some plan to get him out of whatever it is. Presumably because women, generally speaking, are more tedious ones. I don't know. But yeah, I think Luthien is supposed to be just the archetypical feminine, But the best, let's say, that the feminine has to offer, because you have in various versions, Helen of Troy technically is a similar idea, right? And Hellas, sort of being a representation, let's say, of the country of Greece that has to be protected. But it has a lot less to offer in the sense of qualities outside of being just the hottest woman who ever lived. Which is fine, but that's pretty much all she's got. So, of course, Luthien has all the activity, the bravery, and the economy, which is usually how the feminine has to try to get these. It's not generally able to go in there, guns blazing, taking names, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the whole thing with tears, because in Rapunzel, Princess Rapunzel actually cures the prince with her tears. Like, she cries into his wounds and then they heal. And we see the same thing. Mhm. What other legends have that truth? Mm-hmm.
It's quite common, actually.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of specifics, but it's been like a long time since I looked at it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, in terms of the parallels with other myths too, I found it interesting that given how Tolkien loved tropes and he loved these timeless themes within mythology, he actually decided to opt for a different conclusion than the other myths, even the Norse myth, where no one can seem to get their dead lover out of the underworld, out of the realm of death, but it's like he decided to make a story where he could. And one thing that I think could potentially be the case for this, and I have absolutely no research or scholarship to back this up, it's just my own idea, but he had a worldview in which people could come back from the dead. They could be liberated from the underworld. And
Right.
the first example would be when Christ raised Lazarus. Like, Lazarus never died. His soul was in Hades, but he called his soul back to his body, and he resurrected and came back to life. And then Christ eventually, when he goes into Hades, he plunders Hades and then liberates the captives. So these things are built into his Christian worldview, whereas these other myths, like Orpheus and Eurydice and the myth of Balder, these are pagan myths. Yeah. These are pagan myths. They're not going to have the worldview or the building blocks to really justify that in a way.
Yeah, you want the worst version of that story, by the way?
What's the worst one?
It comes out of Japan. It comes out of Japan with Amaterasu and her husband, whose name I can't remember. But basically, if I remember correctly, she ends up just completely destroyed by a childbirth. So she dies, and then her husband goes to go find her in the underworld, but she's decayed, and that nothing they go, ew, gross. And decided to divorce her and leave her in the underworld dead.
Wow.
So that's a version, but it's a lot less.
Yeah, that's even worse than the Greek and Norse myths. Jeez.
Yeah. Almost innocently fails.
Yeah. Okay, were there any other thoughts from anybody else on just in terms of the myths and the parallels?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
I think you pretty much nailed it on those parallels there. I did want to see if anybody had any more thoughts. Obviously, I didn't really talk too much in the last meeting, but thoughts about their ultimate fate, I guess. The fact that they kind of just went off and then disappeared and no one had ever seen them again or their bodies. Like, is there any thoughts on what actually happened there?
I kind of interpret it in a reference to in the Orthodox Church, the names Fevron, like Peter and Fevronia, something like that, where they're sort of tombs they can't be together in the world in the way that we think of it, so they end up together in some transcendent way, if that makes sense.
You broke up a little bit there. Could you repeat just like the basic gist of what you're saying?
I felt it was kind of like the reference, in some sense, that transcendent. Because there are limitations, because they could be together in the world that we think of them being together.
Right. Okay.
Right. That's sort of against them. So that's sort of how I viewed that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that no one really knew or could really fathom the kind of relationship they had because it was just so transcendent in a way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, and limitations in the relationship itself, because I mean, even more damage and elves, there's actually virtues there.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring cultural bias. The problem. I mean, they are just like fundamentally different. I mean, he was going to get old and die at some point, and she was just pining away for the rest of eternity, or like, how is that going to work?
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear in Tolkien's work what happens even to the souls of elves, right? Do they like reincarnate, or like what the heck? So they in theory
they do
could be separated potentially for eternity. So the only reason way that love that pure could be together is if they transcend all of what limits them in this current, let's say, incarnation, if you want to put it that way. So I was kind of looking at it like sort of Peter and Fevronia, or beyond all of the limitations. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing I was kind of thinking is, like, obviously this is the first time a union like this has occurred in this world, and being that we don't really know how they ended up, and no one really knows, like, is it possible that somehow through this union, Luthien has altered the fate, like her own fate? Like, not just from reincarnation, but actually that she would die a mortal death like Beren, and then go to Iluvatar with him.
Well,
because that's not really necessarily stated, but we also don't really know.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it so mysterious. We were talking about this lab class, like just with Tolkienian anthropology, with elves and men and everything. Is like when elves die, their souls go to like the Undying Lands,
right?
And then when men die, it's like their souls go into the West for a short amount of time, but then they end up going straight up to Iluvatar to be reunited with them. Like, only men get to do that. That's why elves kind of envy men. They envy what they call the gift of death because of that.
Right.
So when an elf maiden becomes mortal, like, as far as she knows, like, when she dies, her soul could just disappear forever, as if she never was, and she would only exist in memory. So it's like she's really rolling the
true
dice.
Leap.
Yeah, she's rolling the dice.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
but in so being, she might actually be saving herself.
Yeah.
Like, we just don't know. She doesn't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
But I would say that, given Tolkien's worldview, that's probably a good possibility.
I think so too.
Like, I think that's a decent leap, which makes you think, like, about all those other elves who aren't like that.
Yeah, I think
because, like, they are ultimately destined. They're tied to the material world, right? Like, sure, they reincarnate, but, like, they're still ultimately, like, when material ends, they end. Whereas, like, I feel like this story is supposed to be kind of a salvation story for Luthien.
I think that's a really cool way to look at it. Because I think when you stepped out to unlock the door, I briefly touched on, like, I just find it so interesting that in history this story meant a lot to Tolkien, and he based Luthien on his own wife Edith, and then when she died in 1971, he had her name inscribed on her tombstone with Luthien under it. And then when he died in 73, his kids gave him the same treatment and inscribed Beren under his name, and that's their actual gravestone. So it says like their bodies were never found and all that. Part of me just kind of wants to be like, well, yeah, they're right there, even though, I really have no right to say that, but I just find it so interesting that history unfolded that way.
Right. I don't know, I just think that's an interesting way to look at it. I don't know, I don't know how popular that opinion is. I haven't really looked up anybody's thoughts on this book or on this story, but that's kind of like as I have read it throughout the years, and this is the first time I've read it since I've been Orthodox. And like it felt like that clicked into place almost.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, did you have any thoughts? I know you always do.
You talking to me?
I'm talking to Isaiah here.
No.
Okay.
None. Wow. That's new. Usually he always has something to say because he's another one of these databases.
The database.
Yeah. So you said earlier that typically in a lot of these warlike cultures, they always, like, the feminine archetype is always to sing, and we know that Tolkien loved these. He loved Celts, he loved Norsemen, and he admired like their raw will and their willingness to do anything to win. So it would make sense then that he would make basically the most desirable handmaiden in his entire legendarium a skilled singer. But why is it that, anyway, why do you think in your research that everybody in these warrior societies seemed to elevate or put up on a pedestal the woman who was able to sing?
Well, I'm not a dude, but I have heard that, for men, even considering a feminine voice can be, very, I guess like effective, but, that it has an effect is perhaps the way to phrase that. So, or it could be that it's such a symbolic thing for them. So if you're just used to a bunch of, men running around, punching each other and everything, being able to get to that point where you can hear, a woman doing something like singing is sort of almost miraculous, right? It even represents perhaps to you, like, this is finally over, we don't have to kill anybody. As much as you might say that we enjoy killing people, I think probably deep down, that's stressful. There's a limit to how much we really want to do that.
Yeah, so no answers from the tribes themselves?
No answers from the personal?
No, like just from the sources that you've read in general, like just they don't actually say why, you just see this same theme, this trope throughout all of these cultures, but they don't actually state why it's there, it's just there.
Oh, none of these cultures ever say, probably tell us why we value King Arthur. That's King Arthur, and it's happening, So it's one of those things where you have to just kind of look at it, look hard, and figure out what it is.
Here's a different angle too. Like think about, for example, like a siren, right? Like a siren lures men in with the beauty and the sound of a singing woman, right? Like, so clearly, there's something more to it, and this is like a tale that's been told forever.
Yeah. That's the negative version that's always with men and leaving. It's even portrayed, I would say, somewhat negatively, but people have used in the negative ways in storytelling.
Well, the weaving thing, I think Manway's wife, she's a weaver. She weaves the fates of the fate of Middle Earth in large tapestry.
You get that for fate.
Yeah. well, similar to Norns or the Fates.
Yeah, which would have definitely, which Tolkien would have been aware of.
Yeah. Although coming back to the Celtic connection, Tolkien hated the Ulster cycle, famously, because he considered the Celt. He had a very low opinion of Irishmen, being an Englishman, and a very and a very low opinion of. I'd say almost by extension, a very low opinion of Celts in general, because they're gross to him. But he specifically stated that he hated the Ulster cycle because it seemed that, like, through the Germanic tales, you could say either it's because it's a different symbolism toolkit that he wasn't familiar with, but according to him, in his own words, I can't remember where I got this from, but it's out there. The Celts made no sense and seemed completely sporadic and random to him. Their tales were unintelligible randomness, and he saw that as something other than creation. He saw that as madness, and being the thing that characterized the Celts. And so he kind of despised their story, their culture, and their descendants.
Okay then.
With the exception being the particularly bright Ulster Protestant, who still comes from that damnable continent, but they found to be very good friends.
It was the time when people didn't like the Irish. So
The troubles and all that.
Yeah, especially if you were Catholic. But yeah, an interesting fact too, I think I went over this in the very first class, I don't think any of you were here for, but Edith actually did not like C.S. Lewis at all. And what's interesting is she was an Anglican and kind of resented.
did I live here?
Can you hear us?
No,
We can hear you.
Hello. Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us, Amanda?
No, it's not picking this up.
I think it's a connection. You want to use the
Hello?
Wi-Fi hotspot for my phone. I think it'll be better.
No, it's picking us up.
All right, cool. Yeah, so in the other class, the first class, I went over kind of how Edith, Tolkien's wife, did not like C.S. Lewis at all. She regarded him as like an imposter on their family. And yeah, and she found him to just be kind of snarky and annoying. And like all of Tolkien's homeboys, if you will, were like these top tier intellectuals from Oxford and Cambridge. And whenever he would hang out with them and have tea with them and have beer with them or whatever, Edith would just be totally lost. Like, not that she was dumb or anything, she was actually really smart. It's just these guys were so brilliant that she couldn't really track with them. And that would really frustrate her, so she just kind of felt sort of alienated and alone because of all that. And her and Tolkien fought about that a lot. But yeah, she really did not like C.S. Lewis because Tolkien would have them over for tea all the time, and they'd have all their intellectual conversations, and she would just get sick of it and all that. Even though she herself, came from Anglicanism and converted to Catholicism, but resentfully so, because she was an organ player, and she, the Anglican Church is what she grew up with, it's what she knew, and Tolkien insisted that she convert to Catholicism if they wanted to marry, and so she ended up doing that. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned how much Tolkien hated Celts, though, because it is true that he didn't like the whole magic element of pagan culture, because there's even a part in, I think it's in Fellowship of the Ring, the book, not the movie, where Galadriel says that she doesn't like how hobbits and men look at what elves do as magic, because even though it's supernatural, she doesn't like the term magic, because that's kind of the craft of Morgoth.
Because their power is inherited from Iluvatar, not created. Whereas magic lends this essence of like you are creating the supernatural.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. That's just my initial thought.
Right.
Like what they're doing is, yeah, you're right. It is supernatural, but it's like a borrowing of this energy.
Mm-hmm.
or it's just something
It's like grace.
something
Yeah.
something they were created with. But then again, grace would be different given that this is written by Roman Catholics. So
Yeah, they believe grace is created, but the thing is though, like their communion of saints doctrine is relatively close to ours, as far as I can tell.
yeah,
I'm sure if you really dug deep, you could find some differences, but like on the surface, the idea of a saint going to an angel or going to God, I mean, even in like one scene, even as a Protestant, I always thought this one scene from Fellowship of the Ring was really profound in the movie when Arwen is rescuing Frodo and she says, "What grace has been given to me, let it pass to him."
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's super orthodox.
yeah. Although it should be, of course, the golden-haired elf, Glorfindel.
Galadriel?
No.
Well, in the movie it was Arwen, I don't know.
Yeah, the movie was Arwen. The book it said it was Glorfindel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the book it was Glorfindel, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I initially thought when you said golden-haired elf, I thought you were talking about the one that, died fighting a Balrog at the Siege of Gondolin, and then yellow flowers grew where he was buried.
No, not him. Not him.
Yeah. But yeah, an interesting thing too about this too, at least in terms of vampires, and I wanted to touch on this briefly, is vampirism seemed to be more like a disguise in this, and there was a reference to a messenger of Sauron who was said to be a vampire, and it was a female, interestingly enough. And Luthien took the disguise of this vampire servant of Sauron to slip into Angband to get to the throne of Melkor. Are there any actual myths or legends where somebody disguises themselves as a vampire to, say, cross into enemy territory?
Not that I've ever seen.
So
There's plenty of stories where I felt as enemy, but not vampire or moth. Unless you count Thor pretending to the frost giants, but seems like a bit much to me.
Yeah, I always found that trope to be a little bit interesting because it seems like a Tolkien original.
Well, it goes back to that. I think this was like 2 classes ago or something where we were talking about the fact that Sauron just like became a vampire.
Yeah.
It's like as if you can just become one, So it seems like Tolkien is using vampire almost in a completely different context than what you would expect. So it's like it's hard to even interpret what he means here. Like you just take the appearance of a vampire. Well, what does that even mean?
It could just be that it's going into a different category, whereas how Finrod Felgen uses his elf magic to disguise the Rangers as orcs, but then Sauron's magic is also really strong, and he exposes them through their disguises or something. So I think it could just be a form of categorically just a form of elf magic where they're able to disguise themselves as their enemies. And it just happens that this dead vampire servant of Sauron happened to be the disguise that Luthien picked for herself.
Right.
But yeah. And then of course I think the interesting thing too about this story that is worth touching on is Luthien by her nature, when she went into the underworld to sing to Mandos to plead for the release of Beren's soul, 2 things happened there. 2 things that I think are worth noticing. One is she has the ability to do that because she's half Maiar, and because her mother is one of the beings that can sing things into existence as a sub-creator of Eru Ilúvatar. She has that DNA in her, so she's able to tap into that. But additionally, though, that song became a song of the gods afterwards. Like it became a song of the angels. It said it was the most sorrowful song ever. So she created a song that the angels learned. And paralleling what happens with Orthodox hymnography, it's almost like these words, not just words of scripture, but also words of saints and words of martyrs, get almost integrated into the liturgy. They get integrated into services. They get integrated into Akathis, Paraclesis services. It's almost like the same kind of thing that's happening. And I don't know how much of that is in the Roman Catholic Church today, but I think it's worth noticing that her song, given its purpose and given its quality, as much of an understatement as that might be, becomes a song that is not only sung later by men and elves, but is also sung in Valinor by the gods, by the archangels, essentially. So, yeah. Anyway, so I was going to wrap this up. Are there any closing thoughts? Since we're nearing the end of our time here. Did you get to,
Not for me.
did you get to finish the story at all?
Me? No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you got at least halfway
I'm
through.
like
So
halfway.
you got the gist of it. Any other thoughts from either of you? Any of the differences? Because I noticed like there are some differences between the Lay of Luthien and also this 30-page version in the Silmarillion.
Yeah, but as I was doing some more looking into these things, I think it's just safest to go with the Silmarillion version because I think it's the version that was obviously complete enough to be published in the Silmarillion, but it's also the version that Aragorn is talking about, like when he's referencing it in the book and the movie.
Yeah. There is a podcast that I think both of you know about it. Amanda, I don't know if you know about this podcast, but there is a podcast that Father Andrew Damick did with a Tolkien scholar named Lisa Kutras, who actually my sister knows. And the podcast is about the children of Huron, but also about this story. And there's some really good stuff in that podcast. It's called Beauty Has Been Wakened into Song, which is...
Do you say Father Stephen Damick or Father Andrew Stephen Damick?
Father Andrew Stephen Damick. I mean, did I say Stephen Damick?
I thought so.
I meant, I listened to Father Stephen and Father Andrew so much like together that like I mixed them up.
It's a common mistake.
Yeah. Some people are just starting to call them Father Stephens. The pair of them. But anyway, that's a really good podcast, and the Tolkien scholar is phenomenal. Like I learned a lot of good stuff from her. The one thing she said that I kind of disagreed with is she said that Beren and Luthien died young, and I don't think that actually happens because there's a story later in the Silmarillion where Beren shows up again and he's leading an army of Ents into battle when he's like 70 years old. So,
but he's also the progenitor of the Númenóreans, so like 70 might be young for him.
Yeah.
Well, but that would be only post. That would be his son, right? Or his sons would be granted long life. Like the sons of Daor haven't been granted long life yet.
I guess that's true. It's hard to know, to be honest.
It's true.
You're probably right there.
Well, Beren doesn't have any elven DNA in him. He's
just a man.
He's a man straight up.
He's a man straight up, but he's also been implicated in this extreme instance. It's never happened before, so we just can't say for sure.
Yeah, and it's insane how much it cost him too, because like all of these elves, one character
He also died and came back to life, so.
Yeah, and he's also, he's missing a hand. Like he became known as Beren One Hand.
Wait. So he's leading an army of Ents when he's 70 years old.
And
Are we counting from his birth or from his resurrection?
Well, he would either be 70 years old or maybe 100. I would say probably his regular birth, not his resurrection. But Tolkien didn't say, like many things.
Well, what story is that?
I think it happens, when they have Dior is known as the heir of Thingol. Mm-hmm. And then there's a battle. I think it happens after the Battle of Gondolin, or maybe
that is a bold title.
I can't remember. Well, he is because
this man is the is the heir of the Elf King.
He's like, I guess
He is.
he's a quarter Meyer, which is 1/4 more than Thingol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. This
Quarter Meyer and quarter elf.
Yep, and half man. So yeah, he got some insane genetics. But yeah, like that's the one thing that I mean that like even though like a character that we saw earlier in the story that we didn't really see again was the musician whose music was inspired by Luthien's singing, and of course he really liked her, but he didn't get her. This scraggly man got her, and in a way he kind of has. It's understandable why that would annoy him, but it was the will of Iluvatar, and also like Beren like suffered so much to basically have that union with her. I mean, he literally died. He lost a hand, and he ended up living a life of seclusion with her. So yeah, that's another trope in this story is it's like love costs. You know, it's a costly thing. It's not free, even though it's a fairy tale. And that's why I find it so interesting that Tolkien actually paralleled Luthien with his own wife. Because if you look at his marriage with Edith, it was not a fairy tale. I mean, those two had a lot of disagreements. They had a lot of fights. But his whole thing was commitment. You know, you're in for you're in forever. Of course, being a Roman Catholic, of course, they don't believe in divorce either. But yeah, and they made it work in the end.
Well, that's what it comes down to. Look, like fairy tale thing where it all just worked out. It doesn't in real life. It does not work out. You don't put it in the world, it will not happen. So he just probably had that understanding. And so in that sense, if you're willing to do the work, that's where you discover the fairy tale.
Mm.
But it doesn't just happen. You don't just wake up and then every day everything is perfect between you both, and it's fantastic, and you never fight, ever, or anything like that. You only discover the beauty of the relationship by working through all the difficult parts.
Even if it means journeying into hell and stealing a jewel from the devil's crown.
Generally speaking, you don't have to literally do that.
Yes,
you have to
metaphorically.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
or you have to do something that feels
case,
like.
In Luthien's case, like she's literally
Sorry, go ahead.
as far as like her family is concerned, she's damning herself for another person, for a man, right? Because she's forsaking immortality for him. She's giving everything up for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I love what it says about her mother Melian, where it says Melian's sorrow was the greatest any Meyer had ever felt, because this was the only instance where she was actually completely and utterly powerless to help her daughter because of the fate that she chose. And this whole story is kind of riddled with that trope. It's like when Beren passes through the girdle, which was like a magical spell barrier that she cast around Doriath, and Beren passes through it, and she's like, someone just passed through the girdle, and I could not stop them at all. So like something is going on here, something that is beyond even my power as an archangel. Something is going on that I cannot stop. And then, of course, that culminated in her essentially losing her daughter. And like, it's such a huge deal because like a Luthien, she's not going to be with her parents when she dies. She's not going to be with her kin. She's not going to go to the Undying Lands. They don't know what's going to happen to her. So that's the other thing that makes this story like so powerful is the magnitude of the self-sacrifice on both ends too. And even something I initially forgot too, when Beren actually had the opportunity to just take Luthien and just run with her. But he said, I actually made a promise to her father, who I don't even like, to bring him this Silmaril. Even though I could just take his daughter and run right now, I'm gonna complete the task anyway. And he did. So, yeah, I think Lisa Kutris refers to it as hope without guarantees. and that's the main.
Well, that's like the Orthodox point of view.
Yeah, and it's the theme of Tolkien as well.
You
Yeah.
have hope and salvation without the guarantee of it.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, well, it's almost 7:30. We've almost gone over, so I guess we'll say a quick prayer to the Panagia and we'll get out of here. It is truly me to bless you with it, that help us and ever bless the Mother of our God, more honorable in the cherubim, and younger, more glorious in the seraphim, you who without corruption give birth to God the Word, and our truth, that help us we magnify you. Glory to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, now and ever, to ages of ages, amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. In the prayers of our Lord Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us, amen.
No.
Okay, well, thank you for beaming in, Amanda.
Not yet. I'm stopping the recording right now.